Okay, thanks for waiting. We are now recording, so we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to our second webinar in the Emerging Opportunities series. This one is on residential HVAC. A few housekeeping items before we begin. So all the attendees are currently in listen-only mode. After our speakers' presentations, we're planning to open the webinar up to questions. And so throughout the presentation, please type your questions into the chat box, and we will work to address those during the Q&A period at the end. And finally, like we mentioned, the webinar is being recorded, and we will send a link to the registrant after the webinar. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking a bit about our Emerging Opportunities series. We will also talk about residential HVAC, some of the work that ACEEE has done, and then we will hear from two of our experts, Vaughn from Efficiency Vermont, talking about window attachments, and then Bruce Mass from Ardena Energy, talking about dual fuel residential programs. So our Emerging Opportunities series it revolves around new and innovative technologies, services, program types. If you look at the top row here, we have integrated building systems, energy storage, and energy as a service. And all of these briefs we have already released. The last webinar that we had in this series back in February, where we talked more about commercial building emerging opportunities. If you look at the bottom row, residential window attachments, on the bottom left, that is a brief that we actually released today, just a little bit earlier than this webinar. And then the next two dual fuel programs and indoor agriculture, we plan to release at the end of May, so check your emails for those. So we're going to talk briefly about some of our work before we hear from our experts. We're first going to talk about high efficiency HVAC, and then talk a little bit about our two of our briefs, window attachments and then dual fuel programs. So the middle of last year, we released a couple briefs talking about the benefits of high efficiency HVAC. We looked at both the residential and commercial sector, but we are focused on the residential sector today, so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So we calculated that moving from minimum compliance HVAC to a high efficiency product, which would be something like SEER 18, probably with more advanced controls, would save around 660 kilowatt hours per year. You can see we have that highlighted in yellow, and there is even more potential in an area like the Southeast. We also looked at program administrator costs. If the program administrator paid half of the incremental cost, then the levelized cost of them would be about 8 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty reasonable. And to clarify, if you're wondering what does it mean to be this advanced HVAC, well, if it's part of Energy Star's most efficient list, or if it qualifies for CEE's advanced tier for their residential heating and cooling initiative, then it probably qualifies as advanced. And we also looked at specific program approaches, and what we found was that midstream can be particularly effective. And if you're not that familiar with what a midstream program is, we can contrast that with what a typical downstream program is, which is what we see most commonly in the market today, in which customers will buy a product and then mail in a rebate and then wait for their money to get approved, and then the money will come back to them through the mail. What we've seen is that a midstream program, which doesn't do that, instead it provides that money directly to the distributor, the contractor, can be a lot more effective. So essentially the customer will get their savings right when they buy that product. And Energize Connecticut's ductless heat pump program saw a 400% increase in participation when they switched from downstream to midstream. And NYSERDA has a little bit of a different take on it. They don't use the distributor. They go directly to the installer, whoever installs an air source heat pump in their program, and gives them money. So these programs can be especially effective. We've seen maybe even more so in the commercial sector, but we think that there's a lot of opportunity in the residential sector as well. That's not to say it's not a little bit difficult. It requires some upfront work of building relationships with local distributors and installers, but the payoff is really great. So we're going to move on now and talk really briefly about some of our emerging opportunities briefs. So we'll talk first about the residential window attachments and then the dual fuel programs and kind of tee this up for our presenters. So window attachments can include shades, blinds, shutters, storm windows, etc. They can be a lot of different things. Essentially what they do is they prevent the transfer of heat through windows, so they keep a home cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. And really this is an HVAC savings measure. You can see the savings that we have listed here, 20 to 500 therms per year for heating, 700 to 5,200 kilowatt hours per year for cooling. It's pretty substantial. And it's a fairly low cost measure with a $100 median price point and has a lot of high market potential. So it's really a measure that makes a lot of sense for a lot of consumers. And this is a map that you can find in the brief that we released today. These are potentials for heating and cooling savings from window attachments. And so if you look at states like Alaska, Minnesota, and Massachusetts, you can see fairly high heating savings, $200 to $600 range per year. But we wanted to draw your attention too to cooling savings in places like Miami, Houston, and Phoenix, which you can see down lower. And the cooling savings there is in the $500 to $800 per year range, which is pretty sizable. So if you want to learn more about this, we suggest you read our brief that we released. So when it comes to dual fuel programs, they're pretty much what they sound like. It's collaborative programs between electric and natural gas. They can be a challenge to implement, especially when it requires cross-utility collaboration. This is because different utilities have a lot of differences in things like reporting requirements and their timelines. So it requires the utilities to learn to compromise on a lot of different things, like how they're going to market the incentive program, how they're going to evaluate it, their different roles. So it can be fairly complex, but beneficial. So most commonly for residential dual fuel programs, we see them take the form of new construction, comprehensive retrofit, and direct install. Envelope measures really have been driving these programs, and you can see those highlighted on the right side, so that air sealing, duct sealing, insulation, window replacements. Really the main driver for this is when programs can show savings from both electricity and natural gas, it can help them pass the cost effectiveness test, whereas if they're only looking at one or the other, either electricity or natural gas, the measures may not be cost effective enough to create a program around. So that's really one of the main drivers. And if our brief that, again, is coming out at the end of the month, we go into more detail about some emerging opportunities that we see for dual fuel programs that could be like smart connected thermostats, connected water heaters. And our second speaker, Bruce, is going to go into more detail about how these utilities can work together on dual fuel programs to achieve deeper energy savings. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Laura Vaughn. She's going to talk a little bit about our storm windows, LowE storm windows, which is part of the window attachments, which we just talked about. So Laura Vaughn is the Director of Efficiency Vermont's Emerging Technologies and Services Department, which determines and facilitates new and disruptive opportunities for energy efficiency in Vermont. In the past, she was a staff member in the Strategy and Planning Department, as well as a Strategic Planning Manager for Energy Efficient Products, in which she worked on creating strategic vision, designing new program approaches, and running research and developing pilots for lighting, appliances, and consumer electronic programs. So prior to working at Efficiency Vermont, Laura worked with Optimal Energy as a senior consultant, and as a senior consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton, working exclusively for the US EPA. So with that, Laura, I will unmute you and hand it over to you.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Great. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to talk to you about kind of the work we're doing in the attachment space, as well as the work of Attachments Energy Rating Council. So just quickly, next slide, please. I just quickly wanted to talk to those, to explain who is Efficiency Vermont for those who might not know. Efficiency Vermont is a statewide energy efficiency utility, and we administer and implement energy efficiency programs across the state for residential, commercial, industrial customers with a whole variety of services and programs. Next slide. So getting to the topic at hand today, I wanted to just kind of state a little bit about what the problem is and talk about how Windows and link between Windows and HVAC. So if you look at a residential home, Windows can make up to 29% of the HVAC consumption, and if you look at commercial customers, it can be around 34%. So that means there's a solid opportunity here if we can find a cost-effective solution. Next slide, please. So specifically for Vermont, what is our market opportunity here and the challenges for us to engage in this Windows space in general? Vermont has a really strong do-it-yourself mentality. We have a lot of older building stock. And in general, we have maturing programs. We were running energy efficiency programs for a long time. And in terms of lighting opportunities and others, we're always looking for the new ways to have impact, new ways to help our customers. And we also really want to pay attention to what are some of those thermal opportunities that can help reach our low to moderate income customers. We also have a colder Northeast climate that makes our building performance important. It's important everywhere, but it's definitely something that is a strong lead for why customers engage and call us. But as many folks know, a full retrofit of Windows is still not necessarily the best cost-effective solution right now. Next slide, please. So what is Vermont's opportunity with, specifically right now, LowE Storm Windows? And I'll get to broader attachments conversation in a little bit. But one of the first questions that customers ask when they call our customer support is whether they should replace their Windows. So having some kind of lower cost opportunity and lower entry point for us to start that conversation is a really great opportunity for us. LowE Storm Windows have energy savings because of that insulating barrier and coating on the glass. They are a DIY measure, which is really important for our DIY mentality here in the state. And 80% of residential units are self-install and take, we're seeing an average of 30 minutes to install. So it is a easier product to work with. And LowE Storm Windows do have non-energy benefits such as protection for that primary window, as well as noise reduction. And I'll get into AARC a little bit more in detail in a few slides, but another opportunity is that working with AARC, which is an independent energy performance rating for window attachments, it can help us compare and understand the impact of different product options. Next slide, please. So what was our first approach in this space was to launch a pilot. And in 2015, we ran a pilot to test the impact of a traditional midstream program design in that LowE space. We didn't know if that model might actually have the impact we intended, and we wanted to help introduce this concept to the window attachment manufacturers and buyers so that they can start to familiarize themselves. While other product categories have had familiarity for a while, this was a newer space for them. We did a full markdown of that LowE incremental cost to the cost of a traditional regular clear glass storm window. And really what we're trying to do is assess the potential lift of a utility incentive model being engaged in this space. We ran the pilot from August to October, which is really our prime winter prep time in the state. And we did have incredible partners in this in terms of Larson Manufacturing, one of the leading manufacturers of LowE storm windows, DR International, Home Depot, and Lowe's. And we did plan through this effort and pilot a really robust in-store presence as well as marketing campaign. We had a purchase guide where we could capture measurements. We had stack-out display in the middle of the aisles, sales staff, reference cards. We did a social media push, a blog post, and a radio spot. So what were the results? Next slide. Yep. Overall, our results showed incredible impact. We had a sales lift of LowE by 337% from the year prior and a decrease of cleared glass by 47%. But also, you can see that we had an overall lift in the storm window category. And just a side note, we did normalize for weather impact of the two-year comparison. We also saw connections between our marketing activities, and the sales did have pretty dramatic spikes during those marketing activities. And we also concluded that it was a really successful way to engage DIYers and low to moderate income customers. From that, we did develop a TRM, and we did additional in-depth survey work just to make sure we were clear on the market drivers and opportunities. Next slide, please. So then right now, because it's kind of our second phase of approach in testing this out, we have currently, we're supporting a weatherization diversification effort. So trying to really move into many different spaces with weatherization beyond our home performance with Energy Star. And as part of that, we have an active do-it-yourself offer. If a customer completes 3 options, and that can be anywhere from air sealing to installation of a LowE storm window, they're eligible for $100. We're not actively claiming savings on it yet, but we definitely are considering that for future effort. We're just kind of piloting the engagement strategy right now. Next slide, please. So just talking about the path ahead, there's a few different phases of things that we're considering. Specifically on LowE storm windows, we're still at the beginning stages of window attachments and how they can play in our portfolios, and LowE definitely still seems like a strong option for a greater role in our offerings. And so we are seeing it as a potential great new measure to help ease the sting of exiting the lighting market too for our retail partners, or giving us that deeper DIY opportunity as well. So still a good play there. We're also really starting to dig into how automated shading could have greater system impacts in connection to lighting and HVAC in a smart home. So as we look at the smart home space, what is the interplay between automatic shading, lighting, and HVAC? As well on the commercial side with attachments, we're looking at that same connection. What does it look like? Well, what does commercial attachments look like on their own? But then also what does it look like when they're automated in terms of, again, lighting, HVAC, and also that flexible load management piece of either demand response or shifting different times of uses. And just want to throw it out there, we're always interested in partnering to increase our impact across the country. So I'm happy to always talk to other folks who are interested in the same space. Next slide, please. So next, I just wanted to quickly introduce folks to a newer resource that you might not necessarily have heard of yet. Next slide. The Attachments Energy Rating Council, or AARC, is an independent public interest organization. It was founded to create a rating system, a label, and to certify energy performance of window attachments. It is funded by the DOE and has had engagement from EPA as well. And membership includes manufacturers, public interest groups, national labs, commercial labs, and utilities. Next slide, please. And I know ACEEE did a great job at the beginning kind of talking about what is its window attachments. I also had some examples here showing that it can be anything from shutters to blinds, storm windows, awnings. So just a another helpful of what are in-window attachments. Next slide. So I also wanted to talk quickly about why an organization like AARC is necessary. First of all, many customers and people in the industry are not necessarily aware of the energy saving opportunities, so it helps actually articulate that and quantify that. Second, many of us look for, and when we're developing programs, we look for a credible independent third-party rating to design our programs around to ensure that we have good impact and good adoption and communication of information. And third, the label, you can actually see it, it's on the right side, the top image. The label and website give consumers a way to compare that energy performance. And lastly, rating systems can really spur innovation and advancements as manufacturers really want to try and continue to increase their rating scores and keep driving ahead. Next slide, please. So there is a ton on the slide. It's not necessarily meant to be all read in this right here, but if slides are shared in the future, you can kind of dig in more if you want to. But I think the two pieces that I really wanted to call out are that in the spring of 2018, the certification program launched for phase 1 products. So there are products with these labels in stores now. And then in the phase 2 certification, of products will be starting the end of this year, beginning of next. So I've also listed here the website, so if you want more information, feel free to go there. And I did also want to note for those who are utility administrators on the phone or implementers that the website has some information like utility briefing documents that have lots more information on TRM development or program design advice, which I think could be pretty helpful. So with that, I'll just conclude and say thanks to everyone, and hope that was helpful.
All right, great. Well, thanks for the presentation, Laura. We're going to switch gears a little bit here. We're now going to hear from Bruce Mass on dual fuel programs. So Bruce is the founder of Ardena Energy, a clean energy consulting practice focused on bringing residential energy efficiency, electrification, and storage technologies to the market. Ardena Energy provides technical assistance in program and product design, market research, energy, economics, and financial modeling, regulatory policy, and technical writing. Prior to founding Ardena Energy, Mr. Mass co-founded a green building nonprofit called Build It Green, where he worked to develop a performance-based residential energy efficiency practice, as well as help launch Pacific Gas and Electric's home upgrade rebate program. So with that, we're going to unmute Bruce and go. All right.
Thank you so much, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Next slide. So just to say a little bit more, I've been asked to speak today about my own personal experiences and observations with some dual fuel programs in California, and particularly in the residential HVAC space. So I'm going to be just drawing from my work over the last decade or so as my former role, Senior Director at Build It Green. And in that capacity, I did lead Build It Green's entry into the utility program implementation arena. That was starting about 2009. You can tell from the photo, that's a very old photo because it shows me in a suit and tie. That doesn't happen anymore. Next slide. Let's first just want to pose a question, when and why should a program be a dual fuel program? In particular, when is it necessary for two single fuel utilities to coordinate? Because that can be a challenge. And so it's worth thinking about when it's worth the effort to achieve that level of coordination. So that's really kind of the heart of what I want to talk about today. Next slide. So there's a couple of threshold criteria that you'd want to satisfy when you want to go dual fuel, particularly when it requires two single fuel utilities. So the first one is kind of a no-brainer, is that you're looking at measures that save both gas and electricity. So obvious ones around that are things that are in the residential HVAC space, things that reduce summer cooling, which is typically electric, reduce winter heating, which is very often gas or fuel oil or propane. Sometimes it's electric as well, but very often it's a second fuel. And so any measures that are improving the building shell, improving the ducts, window treatments, as we just heard, these would be measures that would all have dual fuel and energy savings. And so those are candidates for a dual fuel program. Of course, another scenario is in which you've got single fuel measures, but your delivery model bundles them in a way that you end up with a dual fuel program. So maybe you're combining HVAC and lighting measures. Maybe you have a contractor delivered service. And so your delivery model itself might dictate a dual fuel program model, even if the individual measures are single fuel. So that's all good. That's still not necessarily a reason to two fuels utilities to coordinate. And really what it comes down to is it becomes imperative to coordinate when it is vital for two utilities to pool their funding resources and share in the savings claims. And that is most often the case when the measure or the program design is not cost effective when you only look at the energy savings from one fuel, but it is when you combine the fuels and you can kind of share those performance benefits. So when you meet all those criteria, then it makes a lot of sense to do a joint program that's dual fuel. Typical programs in that space are going to be things like weatherization and whole building retrofits, direct install programs, that's on the residential side, similar program models on the non-residential side. And of course, there are measures that are, could be dual fuel, could be single fuel. Examples are thermostats, clothes washers, clothes dryers, dishwashers. These are measures that in many cases will save both gas and electricity. But I've certainly seen examples where, the economics pencil out that a single fuel utility can offer them as a standalone measure without claiming the savings from the other fuel and still make it work. So in those cases, I guess the answer is it depends. Next slide. So yeah, if you're a dual fuel utility, rolling out a dual fuel program is kind of a slam dunk. But in California, that's only about, it's less than 40% of residential customers. And I suspect in other parts of the country, it's even more the case. So you look at the map of California, and we're known for having these big behemoth investor-owned utilities. PG&E is huge. SoCal Edison is huge. SoCal Gas is huge. But the only dual fuel utilities are PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric on the investor-owned utility side. And then Palo Alto Utilities is a dual fuel municipal utility. They're, it's one city there in the Bay Area. And the service territories are not nice and neat as, this is just the electric map that you're seeing here. But you go down to SoCal Edison, the SoCal Edison, SoCal Gas service territories do not neatly overlap. And so you've got lots of customers that get electricity from SoCal, or get gas from SoCal Gas, but they get electricity from a muni, and kind of the big one there. You can see that gray area down there along the coast is Los Angeles, with Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, huge customer base. They're a municipal utility. All those gray spots are municipal utilities. There's also plenty of cases where, PG&E provides the electricity, SoCal Gas is the gas service, or PG&E provides the gas, SoCal Edison is the electric service. And then, of course, within the PG&E territory, you've got PG&E providing gas service to customers in Sacramento Municipal Utility District territory, and Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts. And so it's a big hodgepodge. And so if you're going to do a dual fuel program to serve California customers, you're going to have to coordinate between single fuel utilities for 60% of the customer base. Next slide. So it becomes an important consideration. Well, how do you get, two single fuel utilities to work together? And this morning, I want to talk to you kind of 6 scenarios and 6 different flavors of coordination that I've either directly been involved in or observed at some close proximity. I'll go through each of these in detail. So next slide. And kind of the use case that I want to focus on here is this. It's really a whole house program, the home upgrade program, which is definitely a dual fuel program. This is a program that traces back to 2010, 2012, back when the Public Utility Commission first directed California's investor-owned utilities to implement some coordinated whole house programs. So going back 10 years now. And as part of that directive, the PUC told the IOU program administrators to coordinate and to implement consistent programs with consistent incentive structures, consistent protocols. The focus of these programs is going to be on heating and cooling hot water. And so, of course, that means building shell and ducts and mechanical systems, all those measures that kind of scream for a dual fuel treatment. These programs were originally launched under kind of a unified marketing banner called Energy Upgrade California. In later years, the PUC kind of changed directions a little bit, and they kind of repositioned that brand as a kind of a generic consumer awareness campaign. So in recent years, the program has been marketed independently by each program administrator, kind of under their own name. So this is, a screenshot from PG&E's website, and you see it's not really got any strong branding there, but the underlying program kind of is built on this theme. In recent years, the program has always struggled with cost effectiveness. So in this last year, in 2019, some of the program administrators have backed away from this program and gone a little bit different direction. PG&E still offers a version of this, as does SoCalGas. So this 10-year history of this program is kind of the source material for my remarks about coordination here. Next slide. So kind of the ideal scenario in a situation like this with California, with all these municipal utilities and investor-owned utilities, would be to have a single statewide administrator. And that'd be beautiful. California has tried that at least once in a big way back in the 90s. Made more modest attempts since then. California's efforts have failed. There are other examples that have been more successful. ACEEE has a research paper they published in 2014 about dual fuel programs that called out some successful examples in Oregon and Wisconsin and New York. So if you can work through the issues, it can work, but there are definitely challenges around who gets to pick the administrator, who gets to supervise the administrator. Keep clicking there. How do you divide up the financial contributions, and how much does each utility contribute? How do they claim savings? How are those apportioned? And who's accountable for program cost effectiveness? And this one, certainly in California, has been a big deal. So just to give you an example, Northern California got a lot of space heating and cooling loads. Southern California, we have very minimal cooling loads. And if you get out to the coast, we have pretty mild climate on the coast. We don't even have very much heating loads. And so now your loads tend to be more dominated by hot water. So different program designs are not necessarily cost effective throughout the state. And certainly the investor-owned utilities don't want to be saddled with a program that's not cost effective in their territory if they don't have control over that program. So there are issues like that going on. And then of course, getting customer data and data privacy issues, lots of things to work out. If you can work it out, you had a single administrator, and a lot of things can happen from that. Next slide. So this is kind of a version of kind of bilateral cooperation between two utilities. And kind of the clearest example here is with the home upgrade program. Southern California Edison and SoCalGas have run this program jointly in Southern California. And basically the model was that Edison was the lead, and Edison picked they outsourced much of the program implementation. They picked the implementer and set the program rules and ran the program. And SoCalGas co-funded that program and got to claim the gas savings from that. But SoCalGas had really limited input on kind of the operation. So they had to basically give up most of their operational control. Part of the challenge here is that their service territories don't exactly overlap. And so, within the Edison service territory, there's lots of communities embedded within that territory that are munis. And so in those places, you've still got SoCal gas service, but now you've got a muni providing electric service. So SoCal Gas was still running its own single fuel version of the home upgrade program in these muni territories. So now you have this patchwork of program offerings that varies from community to community. And if you're a contractor trying to kind of deliver services under this program, you have to kind of change your offer to your customer depending on which town you're in. So it made it really hard to have kind of a single clear call to action to consumers for marketing purposes. So lots of compromises from kind of an optimal single unified program design. But I think it largely worked with some hiccups. Next example here that I want to offer is kind of a variation on this. This is two utilities kind of bilaterally coordinating here. In this case, this is where PG&E and SoCal Gas got together to sort out what to do for those customers that get gas service from SoCal Gas and electric service from PG&E. We wanted to offer a joint utility program there. The key difference here is that coming into this conversation, SoCal Gas was not directed by the Public Utility Commission to concede that operational control. So this was now a bilateral negotiation about what those protocols were going to be and how they were going to coordinate that. And as we were working through this, we kind of got closer and closer alignment over time. Just kind of checked things off the list where we had things that were out of whack. Even then, there are still issues that can never be fully resolved. We still have customers in adjoining territories, and a contractor might work in both territories. And in one territory, they're using SoCal Gas's combustion appliance safety test protocols. In the other territory, they have to use PG&E's. So the contractor has to, again, know what they're doing. And some of these protocols simply could not be reconciled because they originate kind of based on company policies that go beyond just energy efficiency programs. So kind of a big deal. So there's some inherent limits to what we could reconcile. So again, we were largely successful, but the solution wasn't perfect. Next slide. Coordinating with the municipal utilities. So this one was certainly with the home upgrade program, there were no successful examples that I could point to. Multiple institutional barriers here. Again, if you go back to the ACEEE research from 2014, they were able to call out a couple examples where SoCal Gas and LADWP have been able to coordinate. And kind of the theme there is that it works when one utility has a pre-existing program that's out in the field and is working that happens to kind of fill a gap in the other utility's portfolio. And so SoCal Gas had a new construction program that LADWP didn't have. DWP, on the other hand, had a small business direct install program that SoCal Gas didn't have. And so they were able to basically co-fund each other's programs in lieu of developing their own versions. And they were able to make that work. With home upgrade, we never had that kind of synergy at all. And there are major kind of challenges with, this tiny municipal utility with, 1 or 2 staff people in their energy efficiency department and really tiny energy efficiency budgets, trying to negotiate with this big behemoth utility on the investor-owned utility side. They have different regulatory regimes, different definitions of success, different timelines for decision-making. They end up with kind of different program models serving these sectors that do not align neatly. So on the one hand, you got this whole house home performance program model delivered by contractors, and then the municipal utility will maybe have a coupon rebate for insulation or air conditioners or things like that. And I'm like, well, what do you do with that? So no good examples there. The closest that we ever came was between PG&E and Sacramento Municipal Utility District. And once you go on to the next slide. So SMUD offered a program that was also a whole house program, contractor delivered, based on building science. Both PG&E's version and SMUD's version relied on standards from the Building Performance Institute for contractor training and certification and for quality assurance, quality control. So a lot of similarities there, so that the contractors in the field in the Sacramento territory were able to offer service to their customers and help their customers apply for an electric rebate from SMUD and a gas rebate from PG&E and stack those rebates on top of each other. So at that level, at the contractor level, there was some coordination already. The utilities, for various political reasons, had no interest in trying to get alignment or coordinate in any meaningful way. But Build a Green, as PG&E's implementer, had a relationship with the SMUD implementer, and so we were able to do some things to streamline. So probably the most notable thing is that Build a Green was able to actually subcontract to the SMUD implementer for field inspection services, and that enabled the SMUD implementer to go out and do field inspections in Sacramento and basically count those inspections twice, once to satisfy the PG&E inspection criteria and once to count the SMUD inspection criteria. And so we didn't have to have duplicative field inspection programs running in the field. So there's some kind of economies to be gained there at that level of coordination. But you can see that that coordination is kind of very low level and very limited in what we're able to achieve there. Next slide. So the last example that I want to talk about, and mindful of the time here, is kind of this emerging opportunity around third-party programs. And in California right now, this is a big deal. So the investor-owned utilities have been directed to outsource 60% of their entire energy efficiency portfolios to third parties. And what this means is that going forward, the third parties now get to design the programs as well as implement them. Whereas in the past, when Build a Green was running this program for PG&E, Build a Green was the implementer, but PG&E was the program designer and basically called the shots on how the program was designed. So going forward, that design function will get outsourced as well. And there's a lot of interest in the pay-for-performance program model, because what that means is that the third party, along with more latitude around the program design, takes on the performance risk. So the implementer in this model only gets paid if their program delivers energy savings at the meter. Model is getting a lot of attention in California. It's also getting some traction. New York is developing some pilots around this. Oregon's developing some pilots. So far in the residential space in California, we've got 4 implementers that have programs that are approved and in the launch phase or early implementation phase, and I've shown them here. 2 of them are only in PG&E's territory. That's the Build a Green program and the Franklin Energy program, and they're only offered for these dual fuel customers that get electric and gas service from PG&E. The other 2 programs by ICF and Home Energy Analytics, they offer programs both in PG&E territory and in SoCal Gas territory. So the challenge here, and when you think about dual fuel and trying to straddle 2 single fuel utilities, is that the only way, there's one of 2 ways you can make that work if you're a third party. One is that the 2 utilities coordinate around the procurement process. So they're doing a joint RFP with joint criteria for selecting implementers, and they're coordinating on that to jointly award a program to a single bidder that they agree on. So far, that has not happened at all. So the alternative is that you can, if you're a third party, you can figure out how to make your program pencil based on the savings from one fuel, and you offer it as a single fuel program, and you get that award. And then later on, if you're able to pitch it to the other utility, well, maybe you do that, and if you win that, then you get to kind of sell that other savings, and that's kind of icing on the cake. Those are kind of the 2 scenarios where that works. So there's still a lot of challenges in doing this as a true dual fuel program. One thing I have seen, kind of going back to, some of the other measures we talked about, the smart thermostats, for example. I've seen examples where like the gas utility will offer a smart thermostat program for gas savings and get those thermostats installed. And then the electric utility might offer a demand response program that is kind of a bring your own thermostat. And so they're just paying for load management services. And so now a customer that has participated in the gas program can also participate in the utility program. So there are ways to stack programs that are not designed to be coordinated, but that's still far short of offering integrated dual fuel programs. Next slide. So just a few thoughts, just kind of summing up kind of my conclusions from all this, certainly is that there are certain measures that call for a dual fuel solution, certain program delivery models that call for a dual fuel solution. Coordination between two single fuel utilities is non-trivial, and so you want to really think carefully about why you're doing it and pursue it if it is really truly necessary. When you go down that path, I think one of the things that came out of my experience is that the higher up the regulatory food chain you can go, the more completely you can integrate these designs. And so if you have a single statewide program, it can be truly dual fuel from top to bottom. And if you're going down and trying to coordinate at the implementer level or at the contractor level, there are certain aspects that you might be able to align, but it's not a truly single program. So that's a challenge. And then what's the last one? The final thing I just wanted to stress is that, remember why we're doing this. And at the end of the day, it's the customer that benefits from having this integrated program design, single marketing message, single delivery model, single set of benefits. So remember why we're doing this and try to design programs that are really customer friendly. Next slide. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention.
All right, well, thank you, Bruce. I'm going to unmute our presenters. So Lara and Bruce, you are both unmuted right now. And I'm going to pull up our questions. Pulling up our questions right now. So while we're pulling them up, we did get one note from Mark LaFrance at DOE. Just wanted to mention, as far as the AARC presentation, a quick clarification, the funding is transitioning away from DOE to being a more like self-sustaining program right now. So just so everybody knows that. So Lara, we had a couple of questions that we thought would be good to pose to you and kind of combine them. So we've got a couple of questions on automated and movable shading. So one question asks, automated shading has a high incremental cost. How do you make this measure cost effective? And then kind of related to that is there any effort to train users on how to operate these automated products?
Great, yeah. So I think it's just like, specifically about the cost, I can start there for sure. I think it's like anything. It's really about any emerging tech or something that you see emerging value from has that initial upfront higher cost. But if we can actually couple it with some broader values and benefits and not just look at specifically kind of a singular impact of savings, but you can start to look at how it'll help with flexible load management and grid optimization. There might be ways that we can start to look at the greater system benefit, and therefore hopefully that cost benefit analysis seems to look better and better. That's the ideal state and the path that we hope to be on. Of course, I totally agree that those upfront costs right now are a lot, and so really it's about kind of how do we keep marching down the path of that future state and try and get there. In terms of training users, I think that's a great one, and we actually haven't we haven't gotten out into field studies yet, but I think that's a good piece to what we are focusing on is how does this really, what happens when customers are actually engaging in the space? How do they, because we all know automation can have all kinds of impacts that are intended or unintended, and so how do we work with users to understand how they can obviously do what they need to do to be comfortable and happy in their home and have their own use cases, but that we can maximize hopefully also the energy and grid impact potential there. So I think that's a really good core critical question that we will continue to explore.
Great, thanks for that response. So we had, this is, Bruce, this is for you. It's a little bit more of an open-ended question, but so what is the definition of a successful program for dual fuels? And to me, this question is asking what metrics are you using to determine if the program was ultimately a success at the end of the day?
That is an open-ended question. I mean, that's ultimately it depends on how the utilities, who they answer to and what their administrators define as success for them. And so for the investor-owned utilities in California, cost effectiveness is a big deal. And certainly our residential HVAC program never truly satisfied that threshold. For the municipal utilities, maybe that's a little bit different criterion. For me, as kind of an energy professional, the customer-facing aspect is very important. Are we meeting the customer's needs? Are we delivering value to the customer? And are we also satisfying our kind of policy goals around, economics and environmental protection and things like that? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that does. Yeah, thanks for that. All right, so we had a question for Laura on the C. So it's a question, I might need some help from my team in the room to translate this, but it's asking about the dollars per square foot for LowE storm windows. So I think they're asking about what is the incremental cost of dollars per square foot for LowE storm windows versus regular storm windows, essentially.
That's another good question. I can talk about, I don't actually know the numbers per square foot right off the top of my head, but I can talk about kind of incremental costs as we looked at it for program design. So, it really depends greatly on the size of the window and, obviously number of windows in a space. But I can say, I have to double check the numbers, but I think incremental cost average for our pilot around $17. But obviously, so with bigger windows, that could go up to much higher levels. But I think that's I can double check the numbers, but I think it wasn't as dramatic as we thought it would be when you get to standard sizes. And the other variable there is custom versus standard sizes, right? Like you get the off-the-shelf standard sizes, and then you get the custom sizes. And so what I'm talking about is mostly the standard off-the-shelf size. Hopefully that helps a little.
Yeah, I think that does. Thank you.
So this is Jennifer Amon. I'll just jump in on this one really quick as well. So we have some of these numbers in the brief that we had released today. And I think the number is about $15 for a standard window. But then we also have some numbers in there for square footage incremental costs for the LowE coating on larger and custom windows, as Laura said. And then also the questioner also had a point about the difference in costs and savings between different climate regions. And so I would point people to the Energy Star program for interior and exterior storm panels that was released last year. And they have, that program is broken up for north and south regions. And so that has some good information on the regional differences in the products that are available and what's recommended for each region.
Right. And we're about at the end. We have time for one more quick question for Bruce. So we've got a question about, there are sometimes measures that increase one when you're looking at electricity and gas and decrease the other. And, there's kind of a symbiotic effect there or a relation between the two. So an example of that would be a high-efficiency gas furnace, which uses more electricity. Do you have any thoughts? Have you seen that when running these programs? Do you have any way of dealing with those types of equipment?
Sure. So yeah, the furnace is a good example. Lighting is another example where you reduce you improve the efficiency of the lighting, and you're basically reducing the heat output from that lighting, which makes a de facto increase in your space heating load in winter. Of course, it decreases cooling load in the summer. So yeah, some of those measures have those kinds of impacts. And in a true dual fuel program, you're counting the positive and negatives. And so, for example, in these in the program that we're describing, what I was describing here, where we're doing engineering models for the whole house savings and calculating that that savings on a percentage basis relative to the consumer's baseline, the positive and negative savings are all included in that model and all get factored into the final number. So those interactive effects are absolutely taken into account.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. So thank you for everybody for joining, and thank you to our speakers for their presentations. So we plan to, within the next day, send out a link to the recording of the event. You can find it on our YouTube page. And everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.